What's the most humiliating moment of your life? No, we're not talking about catching your zipper undone or accidentally calling your teacher mom. We're talking about world-breaking, life-changing failures that still haunt you to this day. Like that one time you mustered up enough courage to ask that girl to prom and she said, "Hang on, let me ask my boyfriend." Today we're going to be talking about 10 decisions game companies have made that cost them dearly. For example, resident villain Electronic Arts turned the beloved Battlefront franchise into a pay-to-win disaster. They required microtransactions to make progress in the game, which rightfully prompted uproar in the gaming community. It got so embarrassingly bad that Disney forced EA to remove the feature just before launch. So yeah, that kind of humiliating choice. 1. Atari game crash of '83. Back in the far-off world of the early 1980s, there was only one true ruler. Its name was Atari, and it dominated the video game industry in both arcades and the home console market. The Atari 2600 was its greatest success, bringing asteroids and space invaders to kids all over America. The 2600 was owned by at least 8 million people. It even made more money than the movie industry at the time. Life was great for the game company, for the moment. The Atari 5200 was quickly released after the success of the 2600. Other companies flooded the market with their own consoles like Intellivision, ColecoVision, and Odyssey. While many of the consoles contained their own game, the market became saturated with third-party developers. This set the stage for Atari's big fail. They decided to push out a port of Pac-Man and went overboard by ordering 12 million frickin' copies. Only 7 million were actually sold, but Atari wasn't done wasting its money. They rushed out millions of units of terrible, cheap games like E.T., and then to the surprise of no one, this resulted in total industry failure, crippling the company and the games industry as a whole. The most humiliating part of this whole story is that the massive overstock of abandoned, horrible games had to be buried deep in the Mojave Desert, like a time machine shoebox of embarrassment. And it'll never be seen again unless, you really want to go down there and dig for a copy of E.T., but why would you want to do that? 2. The Wii U. Nintendo has had a long, complex history in the gaming world. Emerging as an industry savior in the 80s with the Nintendo Entertainment System, the Japanese company has certainly had more hits than misses. For many of us, Mario, Pokemon, and Zelda were among the first games we've ever played. Even today, the Nintendo Switch is capturing the hearts of millions of gamers, casual and hardcore alike, but the specter looming over its most recent success lies its Frankenstein monster, the Wii U. Prior to its release in 2012, the Wii U was announced to be the response to the perceived overfocus of casual gamers during Nintendo's reign with the Wii. However, many fans got the incorrect impression from the announcement. Some thought the Wii U was just an add-on for the Wii, giving its name and the marketing over the gamepad controller. The game selection disappointed core fans with its lack of variety and challenging titles, and casual gamers weren't comfortable with that goofy gamepad gimmick. It doesn't take a genius to know that when your potential customers don't understand what you're selling to them, you're in for some deep trouble. Add that with the limited hardware capabilities, limited third-party support, unimaginative games, new Super Luigi U, I'm looking at you, and Nintendo's cringeworthy advertisements, the Wii U sold just 13 million units in its lifespan. By comparison, Sony's PlayStation 4 sold 91 million copies. This was a humiliating decision by Nintendo, but we're glad to see that they've learned from this failure. Take notice, kids, and adults. 3. Konami vs. Kojima. This is a story of struggle between business and art. It's a story that goes back over 20 years when renowned game creator Hideo Kojima developed the Metal Gear series for his company, Konami. For those that are unaware, Kojima is as close to an auteur of the gaming industry as one can get. He is a perfectionist, combing through every element of his games, fine-tuning them just to his liking. Kojima treats his creations like works of art, going so far to brand his titles as a Hideo Kojima game, similarly to a film or a book, and for decades, Konami let him do his thing to great success. But by the late 2000s recession, Konami began to suffer in sales. The only thing keeping the company afloat were mobile games. Just as Kojima began to work on Metal Gear Solid 5, Konami went through some major corporate restructuring that focused less on AAA console games and more on responding to rapid market changes. That means mobile games, folks. This shakeup was also revealed to exclude Kojima from its list of executive officers. It became clear that the company was starting to muscle Kojima to the role of a subservient game developer. Remember that Hideo Kojima game branding we mentioned earlier? Well, Konami decided to remove all mention of his name from their projects. His other major project, Silent Hills, was quietly cancelled, and its demo, PT, was removed from PlayStation's network. It was eventually revealed that Konami was even restricting emails, social media, and phone calls from Kojima and his staff. Employees were monitored and publicly shamed if they stepped out of line. Really, it was corporate abuse at its worst. The most high-profile example of this is when Kojima was forced not to attend the 2015 Game Awards by Konami. When this fact was revealed by host Jeff Kiley at that point, the audience loudly booed. Thankfully, Hideo Kojima was able to leave and continue making games with his own studio, but Konami will never live down the choice to bury their star game developer. 4. Sega loses the console war. When it comes to terrible gaming decisions, it's hard not to include Sega on this list. Forget about that live-action Sonic the Hedgehog movie, or at least try to. This choice killed the company's chances to even compete in the console market. Let's start in the 1990s, just as the Sega Genesis was going head-to-head with the Super Nintendo. Sega was viewed as the edgy, new company that appealed to gamers that wanted a more intense experience than what Nintendo offered. I mean, look at how cool and nonchalant Sonic is compared to Mario. Things took a turn when Sony decided to jump into the gaming industry. Their PlayStation was more advanced than either the Super Nintendo or Genesis, and Sega was anxious that the new kid on the block would steal the limelight. Their new console, the Saturn, was rushed out to stores way too early in an attempt to drown out the hype for Sony's product. Talk about gotta go fast, am I right? Its limited hardware, small game library, and price tag of $399 did nothing to stop the cheaper, edgier PlayStation from butting in the console war. Sega then continued to make numerous mistakes over the years, hurting its trust with fans all the way up until the release of the Sega Dreamcast of 1999. The final death blow came when Sony sailed ahead with the PlayStation 2, which came out a year later. After being edged out by larger companies, Sega admitted defeat and stuck to exclusively developing games. For their sake, we won't go into Sega's awful record of sucky Sonic games following the console war. Just know that they are still feeling this embarrassment today. 5. Rare moving to Microsoft. At the top of its game, Rare Studio was developing fantastic games with Nintendo. Donkey Kong Country, Conker's Bad Fur Day, GoldenEye 007, and Banjo-Kazooie, just to name a few. Many fans would grow up with nostalgic memories of these titles, wondering what happened to them after the N64 era. Despite what they may think, Rare was never outright owned by Nintendo. It was just a partially owned developer that worked closely with them for a number of years. Even though they reached success with their games, it was clear that the N64 was clearly not as successful as its competitors at the time. Rare was open to jumping ship with a more profitable company. By 2002, Microsoft entered the gaming scene with the popular Xbox and sought to buy Rare to expand its base. At the time, it would have been a good move as Nintendo's GameCube was underperforming similarly to the N64. Rare Studio left for Microsoft, eagerly awaiting the chance to bring its franchises to a wider market. Fans of Banjo-Kazooie know that this never really came to pass, however. Rare was given Viva Pinata, an Animal Crossing-style gardening game. They also worked on some Kinect games no one played, and that's about it. Banjo got a sequel called Nuts and Bolts, but it veered far away from its roots as an adventure platformer. Rare Studio never reached the creative or financial heights of the Nintendo era, and this was a decision that could have been easily avoided. 6. Duke Nukem Forever. Duke Nukem Forever is one big fat mistake. The story of this game's development deserves its own video, but what we can say is that there were so many bad choices that led to this embarrassment. Duke Nukem started off as a mid-90s shooter that distinguished itself from others in its genre for its sense of humor and light tone. 3D Realms were ready to produce Duke Nukem Forever in 1997. Hoping to capitalize on the upcoming Quake 2 engine for its graphics, the team spent $500,000 for the license. In the meantime, they used the Quake engine to begin development. But just a year later, they decided to switch to the Unreal Engine instead, citing its greater capability with producing 3D environments. This restarted development and wasted the company a lot of money right off the bat. The lead developer, George Broussard, then began to further delay the game's release by adding additional gameplay mechanics he saw pop up in other titles being released at the time. Financial troubles caused their marketing and publishing rights to switch from company to company, and that led to further delays. Despite a decent showing at E3 2001, things would only get worse from here. 3D Realms was eventually swallowed up by Take-Two Interactive, a big budget company that had no problem with pressuring the game developers to hurry the heck up. In 2004, they apparently had moved to an entirely new gaming engine again. By the end of the decade, the initial team had spent nearly $20 million on an unfinished game. Many employees were laid off, and Take-Two even filed a lawsuit against 3D Realms for failing to get the game off the ground. Gearbox Studio eventually arrived and tried to pick up the pieces of this monstrosity. Unfortunately, it was too little, too late. By the time the game finally released in 2011, it was a bland, hollow shell with garbage graphics and garbage gameplay. As you can see, the whole development was a humiliating decision, and here we are to tell you about it. 7. The Kinect. Let's talk about the defining gaming trend of the 2000s, motion controls. Ooh. Following this relatively okay stint of the GameCube, Nintendo found a tremendous amount of financial success with the Wii, a console specifically tailored to work with a motion control stick. These sorts of features, including facial tracking, are now commonplace in our smartphones and tablets, but this was brand new technology at the time, and Microsoft was hoping to ride the wave. Their motion sensor add-on, the Kinect, relied entirely on two cameras that tracked the movement of the player's body. This differentiated itself from the Wiimote and Sony's Move controller. The problem was, well, everything. The Kinect would work really well when gamers moved very slowly, otherwise it would have some major difficulty doing its job. There were also no good games that could properly take advantage of the feature, like Wii Sports did for the Nintendo. Microsoft took all the wrong lessons from this, and when the Xbox One was launched, the company included Kinect in every console. This bumped up the price and generally made customers uncomfortable with those beady little cameras always watching you. After humiliating itself, Microsoft finally chose to discontinue the Kinect in 2017. But we will never forget. 8. No Man's Sky lies. You know the story of Icarus, the Greek guy who flew too close to the sun, defeated by his own hubris and ambition? That's the story of Hello Games, and its long-anticipated sci-fi video game No Man's Sky. A small studio with only one successful game series to its name, Sean Murray and Company decided to create a fantastic galaxy-wide adventure, allowing the player to discover procedurally generated star systems, planets, flora, creatures, and aliens of all kinds. The PR was basically just Murray, who was known for being uncomfortable dealing with press. Sony helped market the game in exchange for exclusivity and spent millions of dollars in advertising. This, coupled with release date pressure and audience expectations, led to disaster. Despite being woefully underdeveloped, Sean Murray would boast about features in the game that didn't even enter the development stage yet. For example, he promised multiplayer. There was none. He promised taking sides in a space battle. That never happened. He promised deep ship customization. Nope. Now, to be fair, a few years later after the launch, Hello Games did add these elements into the game, but the reputation of Murray and his studio are forever damaged for lying to his audience. 9. Telltale Games shutdown. When a game company has to rely on investors to keep itself afloat, you know they're in for some potential unfurling. Telltale Games was the brainchild behind the excellent Walking Dead game series, along with A Wolf Among Us, Minecraft Story Mode, and Batman. Telltale focused on developing games that were all about storytelling and branching interactions with well-written characters. However, this company decided to rely on investors to keep itself afloat. Venture capitalists would invest in companies like Telltale, allowing the game developers to make titles with more creative freedom, even if each one didn't sell all that well. In fact, the only series that ever really did make money were The Walking Dead and Minecraft. The rest were commercial duds. But as time went by, budgets got bigger and hours got longer. The single worst decision came in 2015 when Telltale decided to exponentially hire hundreds of employees with the expectation that would lead to exponential profits. As we find out, yeah, that didn't work out. In its final day, investors pulled out at the last second, leading to abrupt, massive layoffs. This clearly illustrates the huge problems still prevalent in the gaming industry with its relationship to workers. 10. Bioware's Anthem. Finally, we get to Bioware, the creator of amazing game franchises such as Knights of the Old Republic, Dragon Age, and Mass Effect have had a tragic fall from grace in the last few years. This studio-wide failure can be summarized by the development of their 2019 bomb, Anthem. First of all, this was never supposed to be called Anthem. It was originally supposed to be called Beyond, but Big Boss Electronic Arts said no, so Anthem it is! Many choices led to Anthem's destruction. One was the insistence on using EA's predictable Frostbite engine, which brought undue stress on the team. Their initial creative lead, Casey Hudson, left the project early. And BioWare had a toxic work environment that forced employees to crunch games out right into the last months of development time. This led to an array of erratic, depressed workers that were unable to make Anthem in a healthy way. Naturally, there were many directional changes that the game went through, satisfying no one. Dragon Age writer David Geider was set to helm Anthem, then dropped out when the rest of the team disagreed with his vision. In fact, he straight up left BioWare altogether. Let's not even get started on how Mass Effect Andromeda complicated production. Eventually, the game squeezed out of BioWare, and it was a total, full-stop failure. Many people blame EA, but this is really on the developers for allowing that unhealthy workplace to break their games. We can only hope that the once great studio can get its act together and make some quality content for us to enjoy. That's what we see as 10 humiliating game company decisions, but which ones have we forgotten? Please leave us a comment with your suggestions down below. And if you liked it, like it. If you want to subscribe, subscribe. And then hit that notification bell to never miss a single video. Peace!